The river didn't look dangerous that morning. The mist lay soft across its surface, curling and drifting like smoke, and from where I stood on the ridge it seemed calm enough, a ribbon of silver winding through the wilderness. But I've lived long enough to know the land lies. What looks calm can tear a man to pieces in a heartbeat, and what looks safe can be the thing that buries him in the ground. That truth struck me hard the moment I saw her. At first, she didn't even look human. Just a massive shape fighting against the current, long hair spread out like a black flag trailing in the water. But the movements weren't random. They had intent, rhythm, the kind of desperate precision you only see in someone who knows how to fight. She was no common traveler swept off her feet. She was battling the river like it was a living enemy, refusing to surrender even as it dragged her toward the rocks. Most men would have kept riding. I know because I almost did. Alone riders don't risk their necks for strangers. You can't if you want to survive long out here. But there was something in the way she fought the current that pulled me in, something I can't explain except to say it felt wrong to look away. By the time I kicked off my boots and hit that water, the cold slammed into me so hard it knocked the breath out of my lungs. The current snatched at me, dragging, twisting, threatening to take me the same way it was trying to take her. I don't know how I kept moving forward, but I did, one stroke at a time, until my hand finally locked around her arm. She didn't fight me. Most drowning folks thrash and claw, but she just turned her face to me, eyes dark and fierce even as the water tried to claim her. She wasn't pleading, wasn't panicked. She was measuring me, judging me. Together we stumbled back to shore, lungs burning, bodies frozen, collapsing onto the rocks like we'd both been spit out by the river itself. And that's when I realized she was no ordinary woman. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, shoulders broad, muscles cut deep beneath soaked buckskin decorated with beadwork finer than anything I'd ever seen. She was powerful, commanding, even dripping wet and gasping for air. And her eyes, God help me, her eyes had a sharpness that made me step back without thinking. She said nothing, just studied me in silence, as if trying to decide whether I was worth the trouble of remembering. When dawn came, she was gone. No farewell, no gratitude. Just a set of footprints leading north and an eagle feather placed beside my bedroll, deliberate and precise, as if she wanted me to know it was no accident. I thought that was the end of it. But the wilderness has a way of laughing at men who think they understand their own story. Because the very next evening, I heard the sound of horses, dozens of them, and saw riders moving with a discipline that sent a chill down my spine. And at their head rode a man whose presence shifted the very air, a chief with eyes like steel. He looked straight at me and said words that froze me in place. "You pulled my daughter from the water." And in that moment, I knew my life was about to change forever. The man who dismounted from that lead horse wasn't just any chief. You could see it in the way his warriors sat silent behind him, waiting for his signal as if the very act of breathing too loudly would dishonor him. He carried his age like armor, the scars on his face and hands telling stories I could only guess at, each one carved into him by battle or sacrifice. His regalia was simple but commanding, beadwork and eagle feathers arranged in a way that spoke of authority earned, not granted. When his eyes found mine, it felt less like a glance and more like the sun burning through mist, inevitable, inescapable. He didn't waste time with introductions. His words came clear, measured, and certain. "You pulled my daughter from the water." Not a question. A statement. He already knew everything, probably down to the second I'd wrapped my arm around her waist in that river. And the way he said daughter carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Not gratitude, not denial, nothing. Just silence. He studied me for a long while before turning slightly, and I realized his warriors were watching just as closely. Not like strangers assessing a man they'd just met, but like hawks watching to see whether prey would run or stand its ground. Finally, the chief gestured toward the fire his men had already started building near the riverbank. He sat cross-legged before it with a slow grace, and only then did he speak again. "My name is Nastas. My daughter told me about the man who risked his life for a stranger. Hearing her speak of me at all was a surprise. I'd thought she'd vanished without a thought the moment she left that feather behind. The revelation cut through me like a knife, though I kept my face steady." Nastas unwrapped a small bundle from his saddle and revealed an object that gleamed in the firelight, a medallion of intricate metalwork unlike anything I'd seen before. It wasn't the kind of trinket sold in trading posts or worn for vanity. This was ancient, deliberate, sacred. "This has belonged to my family for 7 generations, he said, voice low and steady. "But it is not the medallion itself that is the reward. It is what it represents." I leaned forward without meaning to, caught in the weight of his words. "You saved not only my daughter," he continued, "but the next leader of our people. For that, there is a debt of balance. Gratitude alone is not enough." The fire crackled between us, throwing sparks into the night sky, and I realized his words carried more than ceremonial weight. They carried obligation. "You are offered a choice, Boone Carter," Nastas said, and the fact that he already knew my name chilled me. "You may walk away with a gift of supplies and safe passage through our land. Or—" He paused, eyes narrowing, voice hardening like iron. "You may accept the deeper reward. To be welcomed as one of us. To live as we live, take our laws as your laws, and stand with us as kin. Not for a season. For life." The air around me felt heavy, like the land itself was listening for my answer. My entire life had been built on freedom, on drifting where the wind carried me, bound to no man, no law but my own. And yet here was a man offering me not just belonging, but responsibility. I stared at the medallion, at the scarred hands that held it, at the silent warriors waiting like carved statues, and I realized the river hadn't been the true test. Pulling Iona from that current was only the beginning. The real current was here, at this fire, pulling me toward a decision I could never undo. I didn't answer Nastas that night, though the fire begged me to. His words pressed down on me, heavier than the mountains themselves, but I knew better than to rush into a vow I didn't yet understand. Out here, promises carried the weight of iron. Once forged, they couldn't be bent back into freedom. So I sat in silence while the warriors whispered to one another in their own tongue. They weren't mocking me, I realized. They were measuring me, the same way their chief was. Every movement I made, every breath, was being weighed on some invisible scale. Nastas finally rose, motioning for me to follow him a short distance from the fire. The night was sharp and cold, the river's voice constant behind us, and the moon lit his profile in silver. "My daughter is alive because of you," he said. "But you must understand, she was not in that river by accident. She was carrying out her duty." His words stirred something restless in me. I thought of the way Iona had vanished into the night, the feather she'd left behind, the way her eyes had scanned the horizon as if expecting danger. She hadn't been lost. She'd been hunting something. Nastas continued, his voice lower now, almost like a confession. 3 days ago, our scouts brought word of men moving through our lands. Strangers. They burn the forest when it slows them. They take horses as if they were theirs to claim, and they spill the land's blood without care. My daughter crossed the river to learn their intent. The river took more from her than she expected, and without you, it would have taken her completely. The thought struck deep. Iona hadn't been a wanderer caught in bad fortune. She had been risking her life for her people, and I had stumbled into her path like a man who had no business being there at all. Nastas turned to face me fully, his gaze steady. Those men are not yet many, perhaps 20, but their hunger is wide. We do not know what they seek, but they are close now. Too close." He let the silence stretch, and in that pause I heard the river, the horses, even the breath of his warriors back at the fire. All of it woven together into a tension that made my heart pound. "You saved my daughter," he said, "but in doing so, you tied your life to hers and to mine. If you walk away, you will carry that weight alone. If you stay, you will carry it with us." I wanted to speak, to tell him I was just a man who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. But the words never left me, because I knew he wouldn't accept them. Maybe I wouldn't even accept them myself. That night, I lay awake on my bedroll, staring at the feather Iona had left me. I thought of her eyes meeting mine in the river, fierce and unbroken even as the current dragged her under. I thought of the strength in her arms as we fought our way to shore. She hadn't needed saving in the way I had imagined. She had needed a partner, someone to fight beside her, if only for a moment. The realization gnawed at me. I had been alone for so long that I had forgotten what it meant to share struggle, to share breath, to share purpose. And now here was a chance, offered by a chief whose people saw things differently than the rest of the frontier. A chance to belong, yes, but also a chance to step into a storm that could tear me apart. By dawn, I still hadn't decided. My freedom was a hard-earned thing, and the thought of giving it up left me restless. But freedom had never left me with much except the sound of my own footsteps and the endless echo of silence. And then, as the first light of morning cut across the camp, I saw her. Iona. She emerged from the trees dressed in fresh buckskin, tall and steady, her hair braided, her eyes sharper than the edge of any blade. She looked at me, not like someone who owed me her life, but like someone who expected me to answer for mine. And I knew my choice was coming sooner than I was ready for. She didn't speak at first. Iona just stood there in the morning light, the frost clinging to her braids like shards of glass, her gaze fixed on me in a way that made every excuse I'd been rehearsing with her before it reached my lips. I'd seen warriors, soldiers, killers, and wanderers in my life, but Iona was none of those things and all of them at once. She carried herself like the land itself had carved her into existence, unyielding, precise, inevitable. Finally, she walked toward me. Not rushed, not hesitant, measured. Every step told me this wasn't a conversation between strangers. It was a trial. "You hesitate," she said plainly, her voice deeper than I expected, steady as stone. "You saved me from the river, yet you question whether to stand with us." Her words stung more than they should have. I opened my mouth, searching for the right answer, but she lifted a hand to stop me. "My father offered you a place among us," she continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "But understand this. No place in our camp is ever given. It must be taken, proven, earned. You saved me once, but a single act does not make a man." I felt my jaw tighten. There was truth in her voice, hard and sharp, and still, something in me bristled at being judged so quickly. "I didn't ask for your people's reward," I said, my voice lower than I meant. "I did what any man should have done." Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then you already understand why walking away dishonors you. To turn your back now would tell us that the river carried a man to me, but left behind only a shadow." The words sank into me like a hook. She wasn't pleading, wasn't demanding. She was calling me out, forcing me to face a truth I didn't want to name. That part of me did want to belong, to fight beside her, to be more than a shadow drifting through the wilderness. Before I could reply, one of the scouts returned, breath sharp from the run. He spoke quickly in his tongue, but the urgency in his voice needed no translation. Iona turned sharply, her hand going to the knife at her hip, then back to me. "They are closer than we thought," she said. "The strangers. My father says 20, but the tracks show more. And they ride with wagons, heavy, loaded. They are not passing through. They are carving a path." My gut twisted. I'd seen men like that before. Men who didn't build homes but carved scars into land until it could give no more, then moved on like locusts. They took what they wanted and burned what they couldn't carry. Iona's voice cut through my thoughts. "My father believes we can drive them out before they spread. But he is wrong if he thinks we can do it quietly. Blood will follow them like smoke." Her eyes locked on mine again, sharp and unrelenting. "You have walked this frontier longer than most. You know how men like this fight. You know how they kill. That is why you were brought here. Not for saving me. For what comes next." Her words left me silent. I wanted to deny it, to claim I was just a drifter who happened to pull her from the river. But deep down, I knew she was right. I had lived on the edge of violence for years. I had seen it in mining towns, in outposts, in the ashes of burned cabins left behind. I knew exactly what kind of men were coming. And for the first time in years, the choice before me wasn't just about survival. It was about meaning. Did I keep drifting until I became nothing more than a ghost of a man? Or did I stand here, with Iona and her people, and carve something lasting against the tide? Iona studied me, waiting for my answer. The fire in her eyes was both challenge and invitation, as though she were daring me to step into the storm beside her. And as the wind carried the scent of smoke from the east, I realized the storm had already begun. The decision wasn't made in words. It was made in silence, in the moment I stood when Nastas called for his warriors to gather. I could have stayed by the fire, could have let them ride out without me, but my legs carried me forward before my mind had even finished weighing the choice. The men gave no cheer, no smile, no sign of welcome. They only moved aside slightly, enough to let me fall into step with them. That was their way of saying I'd chosen, and perhaps that was all the acknowledgement I deserved, for now. The next days blurred into something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. I learned the rhythm of their camp, the way tasks weren't commanded but shared, each man and woman taking what needed to be done as though it was already theirs. Horses were cared for before men, weapons before rest. The young were taught by the old, and the old carried their years not as a burden but as proof of survival. Iona was at the center of it all. She moved like water through the camp, everywhere at once, speaking little but seeing everything. When she spoke to me, it wasn't with the softness I'd once expected. It was with sharp instruction. "Your hands are strong, but your aim is slow. Don't hold the bow as if it's a gun. Feel it like breath. You fight like a man alone. Here, you fight as part of the circle." Each correction stung, but I found myself craving them, because with every word she carved away the rust that had settled over me. And in the spaces between her lessons, I began to see the other side of her. The way she laughed with the children when she thought no one was watching. The way she touched her horse's mane with a gentleness that didn't match her hard edges. She wasn't simply a warrior or a daughter. She was both, and more. One night, after training left my arms shaking, I sat with her by the river. The moonlight traced silver over the water, and for the first time since I'd met her, she allowed silence to stretch without filling it with judgment. "You wonder why we fight," she said finally. I didn't answer, but she smiled faintly, as if she already knew. "When the river takes, we let it take. When the land withholds, we endure. But when men come to take what is not theirs," her voice hardened, "then we do not endure. We resist." I thought of all the towns I'd drifted through, the graves left behind when greed burned faster than law could keep up. She was right. These strangers wouldn't stop until they bled the land dry. The next morning, the scouts returned with news that made the camp stir like a hornet's nest. The strangers were only a day away, dragging their wagons through the low pass. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. Nastas gathered his warriors beneath the pines. His voice carried low and steady, but it struck like thunder. "We are not many," he said, "but we are enough. The land does not measure us by number, but by how we stand." His eyes shifted to me. For a heartbeat, the entire circle followed his gaze, and I felt the weight of their expectations settle on my shoulders. I wasn't one of them, not yet, but the choice to stand had bound me to whatever came next. That night, Iona handed me the medallion her father had shown me days before. She didn't press it into my palm as a gift. She placed it on the ground between us. "You can wear it if you earn it," she said. "Until then, it waits." The medallion gleamed in the firelight, ancient and silent, a reminder of the line I had already crossed. And as the drums began to beat low in the distance, I realized tomorrow would not be about training, or words, or choices. Tomorrow, we would meet the strangers, and the river that had bound me to this people would finally demand its price. The dawn came low and heavy over the valley, a pale smear of gold across a sky that threatened grey. I had never seen the land wake like this, quiet but full of waiting, as if every blade of grass and jagged rock knew what was coming. Iona rode at my side, silent as shadow, her horse moving with a grace that made even the wild animals pause in their morning scurry. I felt raw under the sun, my muscles tense from training and the anticipation that ran sharper than any blade. The tribe's warriors spread behind us like a living river, moving with discipline I had rarely witnessed outside of military camps. But here it wasn't obedience. It was instinct, a language written in posture and pace, and the way eyes met the horizon. Nastas had sent us ahead to scout, but the moment we caught sight of the strangers, I realized the gravity of his trust. This wasn't an idle patrol. This was a test, one that could not be measured in words. The strangers were moving through the low pass, their wagons drawn haphazardly by stolen horses, their rifles held loosely but pointed carelessly at the trees around them, as if the forest itself was nothing but an obstacle to conquer. Smoke curled from a small fire they had left unattended, the stench of burnt earth and raw iron thick in the cold morning air. They were unaware, oblivious, confident that they could take what they wanted without consequence. And yet, in that moment, as Iona's eyes scanned every ridge and shadow, I understood why Nastas had chosen to involve me. I knew men like this, the kind who took without respect, who hunted the weak, who fought for nothing but greed and amusement. Their predictability, their arrogance, their overconfidence, it was something I had lived with on the frontier all my life. Iona's hand rested briefly on my arm, a silent acknowledgement of our unspoken plan. Her eyes said more than any briefing ever could. Watch, move, strike only when the moment is certain. I tightened my grip on my rifle, feeling the weight of it not just in my hands, but in the responsibility of the lives riding beside me. We crested the last ridge before the pass, and the strangers spotted us at the same moment. Shouts ripped through the morning like gunfire before any bullet flew. I saw the chaos in their formation, the wagons drawn too tightly, men arguing over who would lead, animals panicked and rearing. They were organized only in their disorder, and that was their undoing. Iona moved first, as always. She leaned into her horse, silent as a shadow until the first shot rang out. Then she was gone, weaving between their wagons, a dark streak of buckskin and steel, forcing them to scatter. My pulse matched the rhythm of the gunfire, every nerve alert, every decision life or death. I followed, firing only when necessary, aiming to disable rather than kill at first. But as one man raised his rifle at Iona, I saw the truth of what Nastas had told me. These weren't just trespassers. They were predators, careless but lethal. The shot went wide, but the message was clear. Hesitation could be fatal. The river behind us mirrored the chaos. Horses screamed, men cursed, and I realized that I had not just joined a tribe. I had become part of a force that moved as one body, each heartbeat in sync with the next. I caught Iona's eye across the chaos, and in that look, we understood each other completely. We were no longer rescuer and rescued. We were kin in the storm. The strangers began to falter, confusion spreading through their ranks. Some tried to flee, only to find the terrain working against them, the narrow pass and jagged rocks cutting their retreat short. Others fought blindly, and in their rage, they revealed openings we exploited without mercy. By the time the sun hung high over the pass, the strangers were scattered, wounded and fleeing, their wagons abandoned. The cost was not ours alone, but it was ours to bear. The tribe counted their dead and wounded quickly, and for the first time I felt the weight of belonging, the knowledge that my actions, my decisions, my courage had contributed not just to survival, but to life. Iona rode past me once more, her expression unreadable, but I felt it in her presence, the acknowledgement, the bond. I was no longer an outsider, no longer merely a frontiersman. I was part of this people, and with that understanding came a burden heavier than any rifle or medallion. I was tied to their fate now, just as they were tied to mine. The sun sank low, painting blood orange over the horizon, and as we rode back toward the village, the medallion in my pack felt warmer than ever. I understood now that this was more than an object. It was a symbol of a choice I had made, a commitment I could never unmake. The sun had barely touched the horizon when we returned to the village, dust clinging to our clothes, sweat mixing with the grime of the battle. The tribe moved with quiet efficiency, tending to the wounded, checking weapons, and securing the horses. I felt the weight of my exhaustion pressing into my bones, but there was no time to rest. Not yet. Every action, every glance, every breath mattered here. Iona rode beside me, her expression calm but sharp. She didn't speak, yet I could feel the evaluation in her eyes. She was measuring not only what I had done, but what I was capable of becoming. The medallion in my pack pressed against my side, a silent reminder of the path I had chosen. This was no longer about my own survival or fleeting freedom. I was part of something larger now, bound by honor, responsibility, and an unspoken promise. The village itself was quiet, the usual hum of daily life subdued under the shadow of what had occurred. Children peered from behind wooden structures, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Elders emerged from their homes, inspecting the aftermath, nodding to one another in quiet conversation. There was a rhythm here, a balance between caution and routine, that spoke to generations of survival in the harsh wilderness. Nastas approached, his expression grave but measured. "You have done well," he said, his voice low and commanding. "But this is only the beginning. The strangers we face today are not the entirety of the threat. They are scouts, sent to test the strength of our people, to see where our weaknesses lie. They will return, and they will bring more." I nodded, the words settling heavily on me. I had faced men before, but never as part of a community whose survival depended on every heartbeat, every decision, every blade of steel. The stakes were higher than any I had known, and the consequences of failure were not mine alone. They belonged to everyone I had chosen to stand with. Iona led me to the central fire, where the remaining warriors had gathered. She spoke briefly to them in her language, and I watched as they shifted, their postures changing subtly as they acknowledged my presence. I was still an outsider, still new, but I felt the first faint stirrings of acceptance, as if my actions had begun to carve a place for me among these people. That night, I sat by the fire with Iona. The flames cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the intensity in her eyes. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. The strangers we face today were only the beginning. Their goal is not random. They seek something they believe belongs to them by right. And we must be ready when they return. I listened, absorbing her words, realizing the depth of what I had stepped into. This was not a simple raid or isolated threat. It was part of a larger plan, a series of challenges that would test the strength, wisdom, and unity of the tribe. And now I was bound to it, not by law or fear, but by choice. In the following days, I trained relentlessly alongside the warriors, learning their strategies, their rituals, their methods of reading the land and predicting enemy movements. Iona guided me with an unrelenting precision, pushing me beyond what I thought possible. I learned to anticipate the flow of a fight, to move as part of a larger whole rather than as an isolated force. And slowly, I began to feel the shift within me, the transformation from solitary frontiersman to someone who belonged, who had a purpose beyond survival. Yet, even as I adapted, a shadow lingered over us. Scouts returned daily with reports of strangers moving closer, their numbers increasing, their intentions more menacing. Nasta spoke little of the specifics, but the weight in his gaze told me everything I needed to know. This was a threat that would not be denied, a test that would demand every ounce of courage, every skill I had, and every bond one had forged with this people. And in the quiet moments, when the fire burned low and the village slept, I found myself thinking of Iona, not just as a warrior or guide, but as the living embodiment of the tribe's strength, intelligence, and unyielding will. I had saved her once, but now I realized the truth. She had saved me from isolation, from drifting, from a life without meaning. And whatever the strangers brought, whatever the future held, I would stand with her, with them, until the last shadow was driven from our land. The following days were a blur of preparation. The village, usually a place of measured calm, transformed into a hive of urgency and precision. Every warrior, young and old, moved with a single purpose: to defend their people, their homes, and their land from a threat that was no longer abstract but imminent. I had never seen coordination like this, not in towns where the law struggled to exist, not in forts where men waited for orders. Here, every gesture, every glance, every silent communication carried weight. Iona moved among the warriors like a shadow of authority, her eyes sharp, assessing, correcting, always calculating the next move. I followed, learning, observing, and slowly becoming part of the rhythm. She would speak to me only when it mattered, a nod here, a brief instruction there, but each word pushed me further into understanding, not just how to fight, but how to anticipate, how to survive as part of something larger. Nastas gathered us at the high ridge overlooking the valley. The strangers had been sighted again, moving cautiously, testing our perimeter. Nasta's voice carried over the wind, steady, commanding. They will return. They will think they can take what is ours. But they do not understand the land, nor the people who live in it. We will meet them not as scattered warriors, but as one. And then he looked at me. For the first time, the weight of his gaze was more than observation. It was expectation. "Boone," he said, "you have proven your courage, but now you will prove your wisdom. Lead a portion of the scouts tonight. Watch, anticipate, and prepare the path for our strategy. You are not alone. You are part of the circle." My pulse quickened. The circle. That phrase carried meaning I could feel deep in my bones. It wasn't just about standing together. It was about responsibility, about commitment, about becoming part of a living organism whose survival depended on trust and precise action. I nodded, and though I felt the tremor of nerves, I also felt something else, a fierce clarity. I could do this. I had to. The night fell, and with it came a cold wind that swept through the valley, carrying the scent of earth and fire. I rode alongside my group of scouts, silent but alert, each of us scanning the ridges, the riverbanks, the twisted underbrush. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. Every rustle of leaves demanded attention. And then, in the distance, we spotted them. The strangers, larger in number than before, their campfires flickering like embers on the dark canvas of night. I signaled the scouts to halt, feeling the weight of their eyes on me. Every decision now mattered. Every command could save or cost lives. Iona's words echoed in my mind. Watch, move, strike only when the moment is certain. I studied the terrain, the placement of their fires, the pattern of their patrols, and for the first time, I felt the thrill of responsibility. Not just as a man, but as a protector, as part of a people who had chosen to trust me. We moved carefully, setting traps along the most likely paths of approach. Simple, effective, deadly if executed properly. Every tripwire, every hidden pit, every sharpened stake was a silent message. This land is not yours to take. I watched the scouts follow my instructions, adjusting their positions, communicating with gestures I had learned in the past days. I realized then that leadership was not about fear or force. It was about clarity, about understanding the stakes and guiding others to meet them. By the time the moon reached its zenith, our preparations were complete. The strangers were closer now, unaware of the network of traps and the warriors hidden in the shadows. I felt the tension tighten in my chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation. This was the moment that would define us, the moment that would test everything I had learned, every choice I had made since pulling Iona from the river. And as I crouched on the ridge, the cold biting through my jacket, I knew one truth above all. There was no turning back. Once the strangers crossed the threshold of our territory, there would be no escape from what must be done. My hands gripped my rifle, my eyes scanned the valley, and I felt the silent pulse of the tribe beneath me. I was ready. The night erupted in chaos before the first arrow even hit its mark. Shadows darted between the trees as the strangers pushed toward our traps, unsuspecting of the prepared ground beneath their feet. The first wagon wheel caught a hidden pit, throwing men to the cold earth with startled cries. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my body reacting before my mind fully registered the danger. Iona moved like a phantom among the trees, cutting down any who strayed too close to the traps. Her precision and speed were mesmerizing, and I realized the truth I had begun to suspect. She was not just a warrior, she was the pulse of this tribe's strength. I followed her lead, signaling our scouts to flank the advancing strangers, driving them toward the narrow passes where our traps lay in wait. Gunfire split the night, horses screamed, and I felt the first real taste of fear. Yet amid the chaos, I discovered a strange clarity. Each movement, each command, each decision became instinctual. I guided the scouts, adjusted positions, shouted warnings, and watched as the strangers' confidence faltered. Their disorganization played into our hands, but their determination made the cost of failure painfully real. One of the strangers lunged toward Iona, a careless swing of a blade, and I fired instinctively. The bullet struck true, and he fell. She glanced at me, eyes sharp and assessing, and I felt a weight lift, a silent acknowledgement that I had earned my place, not just in the tribe, but in the circle of warriors who had trusted me with their lives. The clash continued, brutal and relentless. Fires from the scattered wagons illuminated the faces of the desperate, the terrified, and the resolute. Each second stretched like an eternity, but the rhythm of the fight, the discipline of the tribe, and the bond forming between Iona, Nastas, and me held strong. By dawn, the strangers were in retreat, their numbers diminished, their confidence shattered. Exhausted but alive, we surveyed the aftermath. The tribe had won, but the victory was costly, and the shadow of the strangers still loomed. They would return, and when they did, we would need every ounce of strength, skill, and trust to stand against them again. I knew, in that moment, that my life had changed forever. I was no longer an outsider, and there was no turning back from the responsibilities I had chosen. The dawn brought a pale, trembling light over the valley, casting long shadows across the remnants of the battle. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, blood, and damp earth, a reminder that even victory came at a cost. The tribe moved methodically, tending to the wounded, reinforcing traps, and preparing for the inevitable return of the strangers. I followed them, my body sore, my mind racing with every decision I had made the night before. Iona moved silently beside me, her gaze scanning the horizon as if the wind itself might carry whispers of the enemy's return. I realized then that her strength was not just in her skill or courage. It was in her awareness, her anticipation, the way she commanded respect without needing to speak. I felt a surge of pride to fight alongside her, but it was tempered by the sobering truth. The danger was far from over. Nastas gathered the warriors near the central fire, his expression grave but steady. He spoke of the strangers' retreat, their losses, and the intelligence gathered by scouts. Every word carried weight, every pause suggested hidden calculations. He turned to me, and for the first time, I felt the full burden of my place within this people. "Boone," he said quietly, "you have proven your courage. But bravery alone will not secure what we must protect. Wisdom, strategy, and vigilance will define us now." I nodded, understanding that my journey from solitary frontiersman to a trusted member of this tribe had reached a new stage. I had fought beside them, learned their ways, and gained their trust, but the challenges ahead would test every lesson, every skill, every bond. The strangers would return, and they would be smarter, more prepared, and more desperate. As the sun climbed higher, I patrolled the outskirts of the village with a small group of scouts, noting every ridge, every shadow, every sign of movement. The quiet of the valley was deceptive. It held the tension of waiting, the kind of calm that precedes a storm. My thoughts drifted to Iona, to her intelligence, her skill, and the unspoken connection between us. I realized that our fates were now intertwined, not just by circumstance, but by choice, by trust, by the shared responsibility of what was to come. Evening approached, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I returned to the village, where preparations were underway for a final defense. The warriors moved with synchronized precision, placing traps, sharpening weapons, and fortifying positions. I felt the weight of my rifle and the medallion at my chest, symbols of my commitment and the choices that had brought me here. As darkness fell, the wind carried distant sounds, the faint, unnerving echoes of the strangers returning. This was the moment we had trained for, the moment where courage, strategy, and unity would be tested to their limits. I looked at Iona, and for the first time, I felt the calm clarity that comes with purpose. Whatever the night brought, we would face it together. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the final confrontation would define not just my future, but the future of everyone who called this land home. The night air was thick with tension as the strangers closed in, unaware of the full extent of our preparations. From the ridge, I watched their movements, every shadow calculated, every step anticipated. The tribe was ready, silent and poised like predators. Iona stood beside me, her eyes reflecting the firelight, calm yet unyielding. When the strangers crossed into our territory, the trap was sprung. Arrows rained, hidden pits claimed the careless, and our warriors struck with precision born of unity and experience. I led the scouts, guiding them through the chaos, positioning forces where needed, anticipating every move. The battle raged, brutal and unrelenting, but our strategy held. Hours passed, and the strangers faltered. Their disorganized retreat was met by the tribe's unyielding pursuit. By dawn, the valley was silent except for the wind and the subdued hum of victory. The cost had been high, but the tribe had prevailed. As the first light of morning touched the village, Nastas approached, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "You have chosen wisely, Boone. Your courage, your wisdom, and your heart have proven that you belong." Iona smiled, a rare, genuine warmth that reached beyond words. In that moment, I understood what I had gained. Not just safety or friendship, but belonging, purpose, and the bonds that turn a collection of people into a family. The river that had brought us together, the choices we had made, and the battles we had faced had all led to this. A life shared with a people worth every sacrifice. I adjusted the medallion around my neck, feeling its weight, a symbol of commitment and honor. The horizon stretched wide, promising challenges yet unseen, but for the first time, I faced them not alone, but as part of something greater than myself. The rescue had been only the beginning. The life I had chosen now held meaning, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond with Iona and her people. And as we looked toward the rising sun together, I knew that whatever came next, we would meet it side by side,